Our guest today, Jane Bomba, is an outside director for three different public companies, as well as an advisory board member for the University of Michigan, my alma mater. Before she started her own consulting firm, Saddle Ridge Consulting, located just outside Denver, Jane was the Chief Administrative Officer and Chief Sustainability Officer for IHS Markit. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So Jane, we've taped a Vid-Guide about how knowledgeable should the board be about ESG issues, about E&S. What about board presentations? What are the best topics related to ESG for a board presentation?
Yeah, great, Brock. So, I think if you look at the individual members of a board, there are probably varying levels of understanding and familiarity with ESG broadly, and then about more specifically how you would measure ESG for a particular company within an industry. So, I think first, very important to be able to set the parameters about what some of the most important ESG topics are to broad constituencies for a particular industry in which that company operates, because you need that context to understand where best to focus your attention. A company that is doing oil and gas exploration and extraction is going to have a very different ESG focus than perhaps a company that's a consulting and advisory firm and is so heavily people dependent. So I think setting the context for the industry so that every board member understands how their particular company is going to be evaluated within the context of that industry. So I think that's very important. And, I would expect to see in every board presentation some measurements relative to others in the industry so that I can understand how we're doing as a company on those measurements. Second, I think a tie back to how we're operating the company. So, a board should very much understand the culture and the purpose of the company. And therefore, as we start talking about ESG, what we're measuring, what is most important to our constituencies, and how we're doing against those metrics, I think it's very important for us to also understand how our focus on improving performance on those ESG factors is a part of the culture of the company and how we operate every day. And I think it would be very hard for a company to excel along the most important ESG factors for their industry if it wasn't deeply ingrained in the culture of the company, part of the core fabric of who the company is and how they operate. I think it would be very difficult to sort of have one ethos in your culture and try to be driving different results in your ESG. So, just like with everything, I think it's very important for the board to understand the culture and purpose as they're looking at ESG. So I think that has to be an important component also. And then as a board member, I would just want to know how we as a company, where we think we're starting and how we are going to progress to get increasingly better against what's expected from us if we want to be best in class along the ESG spectrum. So I would want to understand what are we measuring, how are we doing, how are we going to improve those metrics, right? How are we ensuring that the integrity, the consistency, of the data that we're gathering, and sort of what's the process and who's involved. So just like anything else, and especially if ESG is just being started up, like it really is in so many companies, most companies don't have full-on reporting and measurement systems for ESG. They don't have very structured disclosure that they're sharing in all relevant public documents, right? A lot of that's being built now. And just like I would want to understand how we're doing in implementing a new ERP, I would want to understand what we're doing with these ESG systems in a presentation.
And I know it'll depend upon a company's circumstances, where they're at in terms of preparation on this topic, and also how many people are on their team of outside advisors, and also in-house expertise. But ideally, who should be the person that makes this presentation?
I don't think there is an ideal. I really think it doesn't matter whoever has been tasked with driving the ESG agenda. Some companies will go out and they'll start to create a department, right? They will hire, right, a head of corporate sustainability or a head of ESG. Most companies, especially today, and given what we're all going through right now with COVID and working from home, and companies having pressure on the top line and really having to work hard to drive the bottom line, don't have the resources to start adding a lot of headcount in a new effort like this. So again, I don't think it matters who leads it. I think that person needs to be someone senior in the organization, who is given authority, who is clearly given authority by the executive team if they're not already on the executive team, and also full support of the board, so that this person goes out into the organization to start driving something that's not easy, but has complete support from the top. And that is the person that I would have come in to do the presentation. But by the way, the general counsel, there's a lot of areas in the general counsel's office that are relevant to ESG. The CFO, the CEO, your head of IT, all of these people should be weighing in. Head of HR, right? So I think the most important thing in ESG is it's not, there is no silo there, right? It's completely cross-functional, multidisciplinary, right? Global, and you need everyone involved.
And then I know this also will probably depend on the circumstances of how far along a company will be in terms of its preparation for integrating ESG into its own strategy, but how much time during the presentation be actually devoted to presentation itself compared to the directors asking questions of the presenter, of asking questions among management or amongst themselves, evolving out of that presentation?
Yeah, I think it's just like anything else that comes to the board, right? Sometimes you get a much more comprehensive presentation, and you get to the end and there really are no additional questions. And sometimes maybe the materials aren't as thorough and there are gaps where there are questions. So just like with any important board discussion, and I think this is an important board discussion, I think you have to figure out how to allow the time that is required and needed. So let's just say it's on the agenda for 40 minutes, a half-hour presentation and 10-minute discussion, if they're even separate. A lot of the boards on which I serve, we're asking questions dynamically. But if you find you run out of time at the end, I think certainly it gets a bigger slot on the next agenda, so you don't run out of time. I've covered subjects at board meetings before, and on certain committees where I'll ask for a special call on that topic, right? Off the board, normal board schedule, and we'll just do a special call on the subject. I think, so the bottom line is you have to allow the time necessary for the board to ask all the questions they have and to get them all answered, however much time that takes.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks very much, Jane.
Thank you, Brock.